Welcome, everyone, to this brief chat between myself and Ivan Mike 1968 and Eloy, better known as Umbramancer on YouTube. I'm going to talk a little bit about Ubiquity, specifically launching a new game or a new campaign using it and the different situations or problems that we might encounter or solutions that we have, procedures and processes for doing so. So a little bit of background, both Ivan and Eloy have recently launched Ubiquity games. They're horror games, they're Mythos games in a real sense. I'll let them describe it in a moment. But they're running this on Wednesday nights and Thursday nights back to back, and these games are quite different, and they're sharing a pool of players. So I thought it'd be useful and helpful to talk about it. So let's actually begin with your campaign pitch so that everybody's on the same page. Eloy, let's start with you. What are you running? And your game's on Thursday, right?
Yeah, I run the Thursday game. I'm running Quantum Black. My experience with horror gaming is just starting. I've read the Mythos for years, but I've never actually gamed in them except for maybe the last year or so. And I haven't done it in Ubiquity. And, I contend that the horror gaming has different flavors, and this is why we have so many variations of the Call of Cthulhu and Delta Green and Quantum Black and Leagues of Cthulhu. And, so it's been done in multiple systems with multiple approaches. So I wanted to try the horror game, but I didn't want to do the classic Call of Cthulhu hard horror. I wanted to try more in the vein of action horror, in things like, for example, the movie Aliens. Not the first one, Alien. Alien is more your traditional horror Call of Cthulhu. Mm-hmm. Aliens is more your horror element, but you're shooting it, right? There are some elements of like The Thing, the 1980 The Thing.
Split second.
Yeah, so there again, you're shooting these monsters, so there is a chance that they can't be overcome. There are multiple books that try this approach as well. The Monster Hunter International series, which I've only read like half of one. It's pretty good, the half I read, but it's more of a blend of action horror as opposed to traditional horror. And I figure since Ivan was doing Leagues of Cthulhu on Wednesdays, and our common pool of players, I play on the Wednesday game, Ivan plays on the Thursday game, we all are fans of Ubiquity, right? We've started playing it and really love the system. So I figured, I can't run the same game 2 nights in a row. There has to be a difference. And so I wanted to try Quantum Black, and so that's how I pitched it. It's more action horror. It's a team of private contractors, so it's not exactly Delta Green where you would be a team of government agents. This is more like a private contractors. It's more of a Men in Black feel where you're not sanctioned by the government, but you are also sort of duty-bound to help humanity and make a little profit on the side by, investigating the horrors and getting samples for the company to analyze. So I figured that would be enough of a twist. And the other difference that I pitched to the group, as opposed to vanilla, if you would say a Quantum Black, is I said, let's do it before the 90s. Let's do it in the 80s or 70s or something like that, because Quantum Black is set in the modern world, so it includes internet, cell phones, top of the line, communications, surveillance, and information systems, right? And I said, well, that's all nice and good, but if we go back, then those communications are severely limited, and that imposes an extra level of difficulty, which I thought would be nice. If you can be in constant touch with central control, if the entire organization is listening in on you while you do the mission, it's too easy to call for backup. So, and everyone agreed. So that's the big change we did to our game.
Cool. So that's the pitch for Quantum Black. And Ivan, what was your pitch for Leagues of Cthulhu?
Well, I do have to say that, man, the music and the clothes are really cool in the 80s, too. You know, amazing stuff. But for Leagues of Cthulhu, you know, yeah, we were playing Lamentations of the Flame Princess, or, you know, calling it the Martian Princess. And I had, you know, we'd had fun doing that, but I wanted to do something different. And, you know, all the players were, you know, familiar with that sort of game. And I think out of the players, 2 of them had played Ubiquity before, and 2 really hadn't. I think one had read it extensively, or you know, had read it a bit. The other, you know, other player just had not read it at all. But I was confident enough with that system that, you know, it wouldn't be a serious hurdle. So the pitch, you know, I gave him initially was, you know, let's play some kind of I would like to play a Mythos game like Leagues of Cthulhu. We actually talked about what time period we want to set it in. Do we want to set it in the actual Leagues of Adventure 1890s? Do we want to set it more in, you know, the Edwardian era a little bit later, or even set it close to, like, you know, the time period of Hollow Earth Expedition, so just prior to the Second World War, because, you know, they all kind of have some neat stuff going on. But, you know, we decided let's go ahead and stick with the 1890s, and a lot of the pitch I gave him was, you know, that a good chunk of the game could be very fun. I mean, well, that's the wrong word. A lot of, you know, it could involve a lot of, well, it'll be fun no matter what, even if they die. But, you know, a lot of cinematic, you know, adventuring type stuff. Very Raiders of the Lost Ark. Very, you know, there's another movie that's escaping me. It's a little bit closer to the actual era. But you know, it's the age of exploration and adventure and all this sort of stuff. But in the background, like, they'd hit every once in a while the mythos in some way, shape, or form. And, you know, we talked about, well, how much of that do we really want to have? And, you know, one of the big differences between Leagues of Cthulhu and Quantum Black is, you know, if you mess with the mythos, you're going to die horribly. You know, it's in Quantum Black, you know, I haven't looked at the stats in the book for a while, because once we started playing, I said, I don't want to know anything. But I remember reading it initially, and the stats of a lot of the creatures are different, and it becomes very evident that, you know, in Quantum Black, it's a little bit more like shotguns and shoggoths, but in Leagues of Cthulhu, if you really start to encounter the really strange and odd, then you're in lots of danger. There's sanity mechanics as well. And so we talked about, like, where do we kind of skate that line between having the, you know, adventuring, daring do, and you know, we have these moments where you encounter something that you wish you hadn't. And so that was the sort of pitch. So we really talked a lot about flavor and about tone, where, you know, what kind of sweet spot we wanted to have with that. And that was pretty much it. And everybody kind of jumped in, like, you know, some were very enthusiastic about the time period and all that sort of stuff, and, you know.
Yeah, I found Penny Dreadful, the series that's on Netflix, and that's 1890s or 1880s. I can't remember the exact number, but it's there. It's the same time period, and it is horror and action and drama. So it's a period appropriate reference, and that's always super helpful when you have a visual touchstone for the genre.
Yeah, I think that was one of the other things we discussed, actually, was, like, you know, how much of traditional, you know, Gothic horror do we want to have in there, in terms of, like, something like a vampire or a werewolf. And, like, you know, my idea also with the mythos was, you know, maybe reskinning some things to make them less familiar, because there is that kind of, you know, if I read the stories, I kind of know what this is or that is. So, you know, as long as it's weird and awful and horrible, you know, people call us a vampire. What it actually is, you know, who knows? Yeah, it doesn't really matter. You know, you're scared out of your mind. Anyway.
And
let's talk a little bit about how they are different mechanically. Quantum Black and Leagues of Cthulhu both require fear or sanity mechanic. And these operate differently. and they both require the presence of magic or the mysterious, and these also operate differently. Has that had much of a factor in your play and preparation yet?
Yes, at least in my game it has. Quantum Black, the sanity mechanics. I'm blanking on how exactly the details are for Leagues of Cthulhu because I'm running Quantum Black. So I've read and reread the Quantum Black sanity rules, but I don't want to get them mixed up. I'd rather ask Ivan when the time comes in Leagues to walk me through it. But the way it works in Quantum Black is it's assigned minor sanity damage. And it's handled in a fashion analogous to your health score. So you have a resilience score, which allows you to resist the incoming sanity damage. As opposed to other things, you are allowed to take the average. So there are certain creatures whose sanity or horror rating, which is like the attack, right? It's a static number, and you have to roll your resilience equal to or better than the horror stat to avoid incurring sanity damage. But it allows you to take the average. So if the creature, if you have a 6 and your average is 3 in your resilience score, monsters with horror rating of 1 through 3 are not going to do anything for you. And that's genre appropriate because these people are supposed to be able to act even under these horrible circumstances, right? So it's less horrible, but there's still a chance that not everybody has a 6 in their resilience score, right? So there's always that interaction, and once you roll, if you miss, you incur damage, and that does a couple of things. The first thing it does is it gives you dice pool penalties. So immediately, as soon as you take at least 1 sanity damage, you're operating with penalties to your dice pool for everything that you roll after this. So there's a little bit of the death spiral. You are allowed, as one of the variant rules that the rule book offers, is to have that damage wind down. That limitation to the dice pool, just every round gets smaller and smaller. So even if you start and you fail miserably, and you incur a lot of penalties, in a couple of rounds, you're back up to 0 and you're ready to go. But the other thing it does give you damage, and much like health, once you go below 0, you are incapacitated in some fashion. That's the one part that we're having a little bit of difficulty with, although I suppose it is genre appropriate that if you go below 0, you fall unconscious and you're basically out of the combat because it takes you a minute to get back up, and the rounds are 6 seconds. So that's 10 rounds. It is kind of genre appropriate because then the rest of the team has to do something with you, right? Are they going to carry you? Are they going to leave you behind? So it. I remember reading once someplace that, in war, it's actually better to wound your enemy than to outright kill them, because that it's horrible, but it demoralizes whoever's side is getting the wounded people because they have to deal with them. Abandoning your comrades is psychologically devastating. And the same thing sort of applies here. So it ramps up the horror, I would think, if one of the guys is incapacitated for the combat and you get that decision: do we leave him? Do we help him? What do we do? So I thought it was a very interesting mechanic. But in terms of long term, those mechanics are, everything in Quantum Black is minor sanity damage, which recovers relatively quickly. And they do mention a variant for serious, or I can't remember if it's serious or major insanity, right? Sanity damage. But it's not really presented in the book. I think they just threw it out have it be there for either supplements or maybe to use in other variants of Ubiquity, right? I couldn't find any, or maybe for you to choose. Do you want your Quantum Black to be more traditional horror, really impactful horror? So that's the first thing we ran into. So even though the guys have faced a couple of creatures at this point, there has been one instance of Ivan's character just being completely incapacitated.
Yeah.
We have had people with their dice pools limited and then slowly recover. And we have just people take the average and go like, okay, it's a zombie with spiders in it. That's perfectly fine. I shoot it. So we've experienced a spectrum of things, and I'm really happy with how it reinforces the genre. The people in Men in Black, they just keep acting, right? And in The Thing or in Aliens, there's an initial shock, but everybody opens fire in the next one. So it's worked out fine so far.
How about Leagues?
Leagues is a little bit different. It's a little bit more traditional. Like it follows more of the injury paradigm. And it's been interesting kind of comparing them playing. So in Leagues, you once again your sanity is calculated by charisma plus willpower. In Quantum Black, when you make a resilience roll, you still use that same. It's called resilience, but it's the same formula. Mm-hmm. But in Leagues, you're making a willpower times 2 roll, and in Leagues, like you have to roll. Like it's it was first presented in Leagues of Gothic Horror, and once you start taking sanity damage, you really aren't affected until your sanity hits 0. So you can have your sanity be eroded, and by once again there's examples given of things that have a horror rating of 1 to 5, and although in actually Leagues of Cthulhu, the things like the great old ones, you can have like 8, 9, 10. It's horrific, right. And so by the amount you fail, the sanity rolls, the amount of sanity you lose. And once you get to 0, you become impaired, and you can only have use one action. And you can do all 3 of your actions, like move, defend, just use some kind of attack action. But then you take further sanity damage. So it's very close to the actual injury rules. So far, we haven't had a lot of the opportunity to do that. One guy watched somebody get eaten by a shark, which I thought might be pretty horrific, and he made a sanity roll. So apparently the professor was okay with that. He's a man of science. Nobody else actually got to witness it, and so they haven't had the opportunity so far. The most horrifying things they've seen are other people, which can be pretty awful. But right. It's been interesting just how in some ways the sanity mechanic in Quantum Black is more and less punitive is the wrong word, but more and less serious. It's less serious because you can regain your sanity a lot faster. In Leagues of Cthulhu, it takes time, and could be specific things that you need to do in order to gain a point of sanity back slowly. Whether it's psychotherapy, or I guess you can use laudanum, or you can fulfill some part of your motivation or whatever. But it takes a great amount of effort to get there. If you hit -5, you are removed from play. You're just complete, blithering it at that point. So there's always a danger of you lose too much sanity. It's all over. Quantum Black doesn't necessarily, deal with that. It's the healing of sanity is much faster. The other side though is you get those situations where you start to take, as soon as you take sanity damage, you start having penalties to your actions. Right away, immediately. So people do start to get freaked out. And it was interesting, losing enough sanity in Quantum Black to actually be reduced to the point of where you're supposed to fall unconscious. So we had a long talk about that, and we thought it would be just as genre appropriate to just stand there and be completely, immobilized. It's what difference does it really make whether the guy has passed out on the floor or is right. Really incapable of doing anything except blurring nonsense.
It's the same mechanical. Yes.
To say unconscious, or then make this long list of alternates that basically mean you can't act.
Right. Exactly.
We thought it was a little bit off genre to have these hardened guys that are pretty much like the Marines in Alien or something, see something horrific and faint dead away. it made a lot more sense to, I forget the character's name, when he's just freaked out once the aliens have you killed most of them and the ship has crashed and you're just freaking out going, it's game over, man, game over.
Yeah.
That is pretty much the equivalent to passing out at that point. He was completely useless, so what difference does it make? But yeah, they do feel very different.
So that's the first good point to talk about. In Quantum Black, then you have a mechanical effect that appears right away, and people can role play off the mechanical effect. They can internally and maybe externally justify why they're having trouble acting now.
Right.
In Leagues of Cthulhu, until you hit 0, it's only a role-playing effect. You've asked for a horror check. So therefore, we have the presence of something horrifying. How has that been something that you've talked about? Or are people just free to not be affected, as you said earlier?
In Leagues?
Leagues.
I haven't really encountered enough of the supernatural yet. We've only had the shark attack, I think. And as Ivan said, I think we passed the check. So we haven't been in the real situation. This is an example of, it's not just because I'm running Quantum Black, but I like the outline of the mechanics I've seen so far. Because there's immediate consequences, right? So even a single point of sanity. This is the old D&D argument of, the only hit point that matters is the last one. Because there is no degradation. There is no death spiral. In Quantum Black, it's immediate. 1 sanity point and you're already getting penalties. Now, it's not crippling because the penalty is equal to half the damage you're taking. So it's not on a one for 1 point basis. So it's a little bit forgiving, right? Particularly when you're attacking with dice pools that go up to 11, 12, 13 dice. -3 on that dice pool is not crippling. It's bad, but it's not crippling for attacks, at least if you want to jump or run or something, and it's bad. But I like the immediate effect. Otherwise, in Leagues, you take the damage, and so what? You still have some points, so I keep going. There, it should be all narrative, right? You should incorporate it, but there's no mechanical correlation to that.
I'm glad you put it that way, because I'm going to rephrase my question again. In both cases, if someone passes the sanity check, so they've taken no sanity damage, they've lost no levels of sanity. The presence of the thing that caused the check is still there. There is this great white in the water. It's coming. It's going to consume your friend, or there's a tiger in the jungle, or there's something moving in the jungle, or there's a spider-filled corpse that's animate and intent on attacking. But I passed my sand check, so I'm okay? Or I passed my sand check, I keep control despite my fear? That was my question.
Well, I'm happy to report that in our group, at least, the reaction is really good. I mean, everybody role plays that. There is a role play reaction to the sanity check. I try to provide some description of the horror that they are facing and the reason for calling for the check, and everybody reacts accordingly. Everybody's at least provides some measure of, my God, what is that thing? And they do portray narrative consequence to either success or failure. So I think it's there.
I remember Antoine calling out in the most recent one, the thing seems to completely disregard risk to its own life. That was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But what about in Leagues? What's going on there with? I guess only one character thing horror check related. So.
Yeah, so far we haven't had that kind of opportunity, and that's something I should go back and talk to players about a little bit in terms of being free to role play the presence of that and role playing loss of sanity that doesn't have a mechanical effect as well, because that's definitely a thing that can bring a lot to the game. So we just haven't had the. I mean, should they go into certain places, which shall remain nameless? I mean, they're going to have to make all kinds of sanity checks, and just saying.
Right. All right. So you were playing pretty different games prior to this, right? And I think both of you had run Hollow Earth Expedition. Ivan, you've run All for One.
Right.
But these are the first campaigns that you're launching.
Right.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about getting the players on board. There's a lot of character options. How did we get to the point where the campaign's ready to go?
Ivan, you want to start or should I?
Yeah. Okay, sure. I'll start. So I had getting the players on board. Two of the players were familiar with Ubiquity. They've made characters before. I'd actually, because of doing some Hollow Earth Expedition and what have you. So they were fairly. They didn't require a lot of guidance, but we did talk in the beginning, like, well, let's, here's the kind of vibe of the game. You're members of this league, so these characters should fit together. They should have, there should be a reason for them to be together. So here's the kind of people that you're better off making. Mechanically, two of the players, had no issues. The other two that were less familiar, it took a little longer to go through like character generation and say, well, hey, what you're doing here, you might want to consider this or whatever, or here's going to be the effect of that. And because there's a few parts in the rules which can be a little confusing the first time, like what's a specialization in a skill versus a specialized skill and all that sort of stuff.
Sure.
And I say, well, gosh, I wish they'd used a different word, for the two. But then again, how many uses does the word level have? we'll leave it at that. I think there's at least 4. So it's like, okay, I can forgive them for just one. But for the most part, I think once they saw similarities to other systems, most of it went okay. A couple, I would say probably it's curious. The biggest issue I see, like once gameplay starts, which I'm always not sure about, like why it happens, is for some players when you're asking them what their skill in something is, when it's time to make a check, they have a tendency to talk about how many ranks they purchased in the skill versus the total amount, like the fact that it's attribute plus those ranks is your final amount. And I'm not sure. I think I'm just going to have to talk a little bit more about that. For some reason, that seems to confuse some people. But
sure,
I think that's a function of not using the official character sheets.
It's spelled out step by
So
step,
because it's spelled out, and there's a mathematical formula format, right? It says the skill rating plus and then equal sign and then the
Right.
total. So I think that even that thing. If you forget because you haven't played Ubiquity for a while, you sort of look at the mathematical formula and you figure that's the important number, the one after the equal sign. So, because I know that the guys having difficulty with that are not using the sheets. And
and there is specific jargon in the books. Your
Yes.
score in your attribute, your level in the skill for your rating, and you roll the rating.
And I think that distinction, that precise language, is invaluable in a dice pool game. I think it's fantastic because it tells you explicitly which of the numbers matters here. When you go to the benchmark figures for Ubiquity and you want to figure out, this skill is equal to what, it says, the rating is this. So it doesn't matter how many ranks you have in the thing. If your rating, which is the final total, equals this is equivalent to university degree or master's degree, or you're equal to an Olympic level athlete at this point. And I think that adds a whole dimension that a lot of games miss. Because of the traditional emphasis on purchasing specific skill ranks. You know, so I that's one of the best features of Ubiquity for me.
Cool. But yeah, writing it out and boxing or whatever around your attack rating. One thing that I like to do when I make my own sheets is actually do that. The weapons I'm most likely to use with that character.
Correct.
They have their own line on the sheet. And, it says 45 automatics, and this is my rating with them.
Yeah.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
Fall on the box and go.
For all for one, I've got the ratings for my rating for each type of attack. Whether I'm disarming everything, because
And I went one step further and I printed out. Let me see if I can. Oops. Here we go. I printed out the actual skills page, right? And then wrote the ratings for all the skills. Even if I have to use them untrained, my character has a jack of all trades. But even if he didn't. The fact that you can look at something and then just see it's a 1 or it's a 0 or it's whatever it is, and you have the entire list of skills, it speeds up play a lot and allows you to get a ballpark feeling for what your capability is. Like, can I help here? No, boy, I can't really help at all. Or, yeah, I'd better not even try to do that medicine check or something. So I think it's really useful.
Which is great with your character, because every time somebody's about to do something, I know a little bit about that. I can assist.
Exactly. I love my character. That's the best ever.
Overconfident braggart. Yeah. Okay.
And synergy.
Yes. Synergy is another great feature of the game that it has. It reminds me of Burning Wheel. The rules are quite similar, and one of my favorite improvements or details that all skill-based games have is the ease of helping. It's a very simple rule. If you have 4, you add +2. You have 4 on the rating, not rank, rating, then you can help with 2 dice. You can help the other guy do that. And there are what in Burning Wheel would be called fields of related knowledge. Because if you're good at one thing, that knowledge, you can draw upon that knowledge to help yourself, if you will. And it's the exact same format, right? It's if you have a 4, you can help yourself by giving yourself 2 extra dice. And I think that adds a whole level of granularity. I think that's fantastic design.
So, with the people who hadn't played Ubiquity before, how long do you estimate it took them to bring a character ready to play, or at least on their own feel like they had they had finished their character? An hour, 20 minutes, 5 minutes.
It's hard to say, but in terms of like how much time they took, because I don't know, because we weren't actually physically together.
Right, you didn't do it together.
Yeah.
So they went away and made characters and came back and said, "This is the guy I want to play."
Yeah, I mean there was a lot. I mean, and I actually did some talks. Like we had a little private Facebook group, and I would make have little talks like, well, this is kind of what you're going to be doing, and here's some things to watch out for and what have you. And I don't know how useful that was, but it helped. I like to talk, so whatever. But I tried to I knew there were things that gave me trouble, or like that were stumbling blocks for me for a second, and things that I had to read a couple times to figure out. So I think in the case of my game, I think they had a couple tries, like they brought something and they said, okay, we might want to change this a little bit, but
okay. I bring it up because the game can be a little on the lethal side.
Oh yeah.
So the fear of loss or the risk of loss. Where are you balancing your different campaigns on that that fulcrum between the characters need to survive? So I'm going to modify something so that they can, or the characters can be replaced, so I can just let the dice fall where they may.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez, have we had any near death experiences so far?
Yes, we had.
Yes,
one.
We have.
Yeah. So before we go into the near death, I'd like to point out that I think that the steepest part of the Ubiquity learning curve is actually character creation. It's the hardest, at least it was for me, figuring out the math, figuring out that the rating is actually what gives you the ballpark estimate, right? So if you have a good attribute, you don't really need a lot of skill ranks, right? You can sort of squeeze by. And the letting go of the need to have minimum ranks in everything. I need a little bit of everything. Because the first time I did a character, I would micromanage and do half points and try to get everything up to a minimum level. And that's not how the sample characters are handled. And once you handle one of those sample characters, you realize, oh, it's okay. I can just do this, you know, and there's always a little bit of chance that I can do something else. And so you learn how to build a character. And once you start trying to let go of a little bit of that micromanaging and getting a little 1 point, you know, there's a word for that. Once you start, I can't remember what it is, but instead of going like putting little bits of skill everywhere, you learn just specialize in something, be good at something, and so that to me that was a yeah, and that I ran into problems with the math initially, and I sent the character to Ivan a couple of times, and Ivan did the math over and sent it back. It was like doing homework. I would get, you know, reports back, and no, fix this, and I would fix it, and back and forth until we got it. So that to me is the steepest learning curve.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, yeah, I think for some people, even for me to this day, even when creating a character or a non-player character, I have to fight that urge to want to make them a little wider in skills and just, you know, be okay with specializing them. And of course, you know, Jose, who's like the most astute, you know, ever when it comes to systems like that, says, oh no, it's like mathematically what you want to do is you want to jack these things up here because that's when they're really cheap, like character generation. And of course, you know, he never buys another talent. He uses the other 15 XP for more skills. And he's like, okay, because then you can buy them here, but you can buy them much cheaper. And that's the thing I wanted to be a little good at, you know. You know, and yeah, he's figured the whole thing out.
Yeah. That's what I tried to do the first time I played the game, but I sort of accepted the and at the end of the day, the character sheet, if you don't try to put points in everything, character sheet is easier to manage. You can just look down and it's like 6 skills. And it's like, yes, I'm good at those 6. I can do the other things and I can look them up. And that's why I photocopied the other page, right? But, you know, I can look down and this is what I'm good at. I can do this right now. And so that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, I think probably the only other thing I've run into with players occasionally, you know, in games before, and these is occasionally the tendency every once in a while for people to assume what the skill means rather than really kind of read them and see where it's differentiated, you know. And there's only a few of them that seem to give people trouble, like something like academics, and you know, like, well, I think like read the paragraph. Oh, okay. Yeah. You know, that's what
academic or spying or
right.
So there's competence as an issue, right? So you're playing a group of experts in Quantum Black. Maybe you're playing a group of eclectic adventurers in Leagues of Cthulhu. You've never played Ubiquity before. You don't have any idea what your character's level is, right? And what effect improvement will have. You know, like talents have a really strong effect on the game. How long will it be before I can get another one? How long will it be before I can improve the talent I have, if it's the type that improves, that kind of thing? These are all complete mysteries until, you know, you have enough sessions in to do improvement. So,
agreed. And this is where the sample characters come in. They're very well designed. They're very flavorful, and they're very, genre appropriate. And like Ivan pointed out, you can even look at Hollow Earth Expedition for similar archetypes. It's just a more Victorian version of those. But even if you look at the archetypes in Hex, and you have examples, and you can measure the character that you do and compare it to the archetype. So that's the fact that they are well done helps you check your design. And what?
And correct.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what happened in that lethal encounter?
What happened with the what? With the lethal attack?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we glossed over that for a second.
Yeah, we glossed out.
We had a couple lethal attacks actually, both games.
Yeah. Okay, so in Quantum Black, it being horror, I'm not a fan of fudging, so I will roll the dice and whatever happens, happens. We did have a serious attack on a player that took him down 7 health in one single attack, and that's where I got a little bit scared, and I said, well, the math of the monsters, when you look at them, when you do a cursory inspection, they don't look so deadly. And then when you see them in play, it's like, wait a minute, maybe they're deadlier than I thought. So,
right. To be clear, that character had 3 health levels left before death.
Yeah. So it was a huge. This was a single attack. The monster shows up. They tried to grapple because I tried. I remember your video, Anthony, way back on playing monsters. And I said, let's read the monster description. What does the monster do? How can I make this not D&D in the sense of, well, next round it attacks. Next round what you do, it attacks. Next round what you do, it attacks. So I tried to visualize what the monster would do. And one of the parts of the description says, well, the monster will try to grab the person and then bite it. And it's like, that's a grapple attack because you're trying to bite it, or to trip it, grab it, throw him down on the floor, and then bite him. And so I figured, well, let's try this on for size, right? So the first attack is just a grapple, and they managed to, they succeeded, but no damage is incurred, and the guys were like, okay, I'm grappled. There's 3 guys, there's 2 monsters, it's cool. Next round, they break out of the, their next action, they break out of the grapple. And it's like, great, they break out of the grapple. And so I figured, well, at this point, the monster rakes you with its claws. And that's where the serious damage happened. And so it was a scary moment, but, and it made me second guess the whole thing. It's like, wait a minute, am I going to just TPK everybody in the first encounter of the first, because that affects your adventure design, right? It's like, if this is a one monster game, I need to, recalibrate my design of the adventure. But to skip ahead a little bit, we had a second encounter where 2 of the characters sneak down to the basement, and this is Quantum Black. They have automatic weapons, which we do not have in Leagues of Cthulhu. And so
which is unfortunate.
I put 4 monsters of the same one that almost, one-shotted a character in the previous encounter. Instead of being 2 against 3 people, this was 4 monsters against 2 people. So let's see how this, works now, because I'm sort of, I'm not retconning anything. I thought there would be 4 monsters in the basement. I'm going to keep my 4 monsters, and what happens, happens. Right. And then the team leader shoots a handgun and misses. And it's like, this is going to be really bad. Everybody's going to die. And then the other character is on the floor, having aimed for 2 actions. So he's got a +4 on his dice pool. And he hits the auto-fire strafing rules. And in a single shot, he wipes out the entire 4 monsters. It cost him a 20 bullet clip, right, in one action. But he managed to completely destroy all the 4 zombie monsters, right? And I thought that's where the balance is at. This is why it's shotguns and shotguns, right? Shotguns are important. The other guys upstairs had no weapon drawn. The monsters attacked. Their initial reaction was to maybe I'll hit him on the head, because they didn't realize there were zombies, right? So their initial reaction is I'll club him on the head. One of the guys hesitated before. My first reaction as a player, had I been there, is pull my gun, but I'm the DM, so everybody reacts differently, right? So they figured that maybe they're not zombies, so they started pulling out clubs and stuff. And it's the wrong weapon. You're bringing a knife to a gunfight, right?
But the dark.
Exactly. And so that didn't work. But as soon as the guns came out, the odds were evened. So that's, I think that's genre appropriate too. This is action, right? Just shoot it. Yeah.
Right on. Yeah, we had not quite as lethal, but what it could have been actually. In in the Leaves of Cthulhu game, they were attacked by pirates,
Right.
on their tramp steamer, and that was a fun combat to run. It really was. But just in the scene before, one of the characters was involved in a boxing match, and he gets one of the things about Ubiquity is generally the attack pools are a lot bigger than the defense pools, and I rolled. I think I rolled something like 6 successes, and he rolled the average for defense, and so he takes 4 non-lethal wounds, bang, just gets almost knocked out, and so he's already down health, and then gets involved in the combat, and I think ends up taking a couple of lethal wounds and getting down to -1 in a hurry. And had the combat gone on, he would have been a goner, because at that point, so things can happen really fast. Of course, I've had plenty of experience playing Philippe Moreau getting shot, and instantly getting taken out. But that it gives you some respect for it. It's very it can be very cinematic, but you can get hurt in a hurry. You can also hurt your opponents in a hurry. So it's a good balance, I think, between that really hopelessly lethal that some games have, and the ability to keep up and stay alive and do some cool stuff during those moments, rather than have just being a dice rolling slugfest. Which is really neat. And for the rest of the people around them, I could have handled the combat in a lot of different ways as far as the pirates versus the crew. And really, all I ended up doing was deciding, what, I'm just gonna. They're all pretty much people with like a 4-die defensive pool and a 6-die offensive pool, and I'm just gonna assume they always roll a 2 for defense. I'm gonna roll these 6 dice and see how many. And that many successes was that many guys who just got taken out of the fight. Doesn't matter if they're dead or incapacitated. It's just seemed about right.
And it's all fair. It's pretty much the same as doing the dice rolling without taking the time to do the dice rolling.
Do I really want to dice roll for like 20 guys on the deck, like when it's really not about them? It's like, yes, these people are dropping around you, but in the meantime, what are you doing with the guy that really wants to kill you?
So it works the same way as a clock or a timer, and it's pretty slick. The design of characters is one of my favorite parts of Ubiquity, the trade-offs that you're making, right? You'll see a lot of people want to throw a lot of points into decks, and then discover that strength is used for a lot of the things that they think that dex is going to be used for, and they have to recalculate the perceptions, and they're working toward that defense pool, right? I want that defense pool to be really high, and we'll do so at the expense of willpower or at the expense of charisma, and those things are going to be important. And which is not to say that we need to be 3-3-3-2-2-2, but it's interesting how many experienced Ubiquity players actually field that character, and but like your Philippe Moreau has a 5 health,
right,
and Francois' character Brise Cour, I think, has a 4 or a 5. I can't remember.
Yeah, not remarkable.
Mine 6.
Right.
6 health levels. And so when you got shot and blown off your horse, that was a survivable injury for my character. And it's kind of interesting, this difference. You've got a benefit because of that decision that you've made, and I've got a deficit because of that decision. And
yeah, no, that definitely is really cool. I mean, it's been interesting to see too, like where people have taken the characters. Like, I have one guy in my game who's decided I'm just going to have a 5 intelligence, because he's the academic type, and ended up taking the talent of I think it's like well-educated, when it comes to science, and put in that skill, like threw 5 points in it. So this guy has a 10-die pool on a lot of stuff, but in a lot of other areas, he's not the guy you want, in your gunfight or what have you.
Right. To get that 5, he has to take a 1.
Right.
So yeah.
That's an interesting little note that Quantum Black gives you. Yeah, Quantum Black gives you that admonition. No matter what character you do, make sure you get one combat skill. And so you are instructed to incorporate that into character creation because of the nature of the game, right? If you're all field operatives, there has to be a minimum degree of competency in that, right?
Right.
You have to take some sort of a combat skill, at least a firearm or something. So
Was that a hard sell? Did everybody buy into that, or did you have one or two people who said, you know what, I want to be the guy who doesn't have combat skills?
I usually have at least one or two guys who enjoy playing the more scholarly types, and so I just reminded them of that. It's like, yes, you can be the scholarly guy, but this is a field operation, so make sure you will survive a fight, right? You at least have the means of defending yourself, because it will come into play. And it's always good to have the backing of the official rules, right? It's like, you read this page, it's right there, black and white. You need to do this as part of character creation. You can do more, you can put more points in it, but a minimum of, I think it's 2. I can't remember the exact number, but there's a specific admonition to do that, and I think that's great to reinforce this particular genre. Yeah.
Well, especially because you're dealing with a modern structured company, so they have to get through human resources, right? There's just I can't let you out of the building unless So
exactly. That's what came to mind. I mean, if you're this helpless in the field, they just won't send you out in the field. They'll keep you on a desk, and nobody wants to play that. So.
Oh, we're talking about everybody taking a combat skill?
Yeah.
The requirement? Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. It's good that the
Do you
rule...
have the same requirement for leagues, Ivan, that everyone be combat capable, or everyone be scholarly, or everyone be whatever? Did everybody have to be in the same league? Or
Yeah, we decided that we wanted to all be in the same league. In fact, we made one up, the Antaeus Society, and one of the players came up with that brilliant name, Explorers of the Earth and Sea,
what were the skills that it provides?
Oh gosh,
I have them here. Hang on, let me.
I always have to ask them question that makes people searching for.
Yeah.
For.
They think there might have been. There might have been like anthropology, because archaeological research was a pretty big thing.
Anthropology, expeditions, investigation, and I think the last one was up to you. I think we. Because I seem to have melee for some reason. Yeah.
So some of the people would be. Yeah, I think just about everybody has a little bit of expeditions in them. I forget which character has like the most of that. One fellow, actually, I think it was our academic, took a pretty high bureaucracy skill as well. So which is pretty useful. Yeah. I didn't necessarily require them to do too much more than that, other than like float like character concepts out first before even like picking up the the pen and the calculator.
So you, as the game master, had first refusal.
Yeah. It's like what kind of concepts are you bringing out for people? Because that way it was more like bringing the right group of people together. So we do have a doctor, so if somebody gets particularly injured, it might be okay, and and our academic and all that sort of stuff, and our jack of all trades, man of the world,
which came in handy because sure enough, in our first combat, the first guy to get injured and go down was the doctor. So, no medicine skill. Fortunately, the jack of all trades had, a 4 there, so I could step in. So
yeah, that is a wonderful town. I took it once in the Hex game that Anthony ran for Jason and I. It was great.
So both of you guys have a fondness for old school, early edition Dungeons and Dragons. And it's many retro forms. Right, there's a lot of love between you guys for that, which has a reputation for lethality.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how is Ubiquity stacking up in terms of potential lethality with games like that?
Oh man, it's it reminds me of very low level
play. Yeah.
play. Yeah, maybe not first level, but probably by about second, probably about third level, because you
At
have
most.
a little,
Yeah.
at most, at
Yeah.
most.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to tread carefully.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a pretty close fit between those two, right? I could see a lot of old school type people transitioning to this system because there are so many similarities, and yet it's quite different in its approach, but there are a lot of things that feel familiar. This makes sense, it's
Or
it's it's very lethal. The combat is 6-second rounds. It's there's a lot of similarities there. Not to mention in mechanical terms, right? There's a lot of +2s and -2s and +4s and -4s. There's some granularity in some aspects, but in others there is not. So, it's a similar sense of level of granularity to the rules, if you will. So it's kind of reminiscent. In a way.
No. Yeah, the more I play it, the more reminiscent it actually is, because you start to get this feeling, there isn't that moment or that scaling where all of a sudden you become so inhuman because you become too powerful that you're doing these ridiculous things. The characters always feel fragile. You can't, even Philippe Moreau, who's a pretty good combatant, once he's outnumbered, it's going to go badly, or he has the potential to have things to go badly. He shows up very fast, and if they do something smart like shoot at him, he's a goner. But
right.
Also,
That's
just the way
that played for a long time, but still is somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 additional XP added to him. I'm playing one now that was built a standard character and then had 60 XP added on, and this is a very powerful Ubiquity character, so taking ambidexterity and quick draw, so drawing weapons is a reflex action, firing 2 weapons, and having the accuracy talent and stuff like this. We're talking about the capacity with firearms to do a tremendous amount of damage, but at the same time still has 5 health levels, a defensive score of 6 to 8, and still pretty grounded in the human realm.
Yeah, and there's that, and there's the one of the nicer things about combat is there's very you don't have so many misses, which is nice because it is faster, although that can be a little bit of a nail biter. And just like as like Eloy said, the when you're not 100% sure of the rule, you can get really close in the ballpark, like by modifying by get 2 more dice or 4 more dice, which are pretty analogous to +1 or +2. You can start to develop that kind of to feel for it. And also, it's funny, even though those older games weren't skill based, the characters had archetypes, and you kind of had, well, like, my guy is like this and knows how to do these things, and via a lot of taking the average, and having like a skill at like 6 or 8 or 10 and something. A lot of times you don't necessarily have to roll dice or do anything. It's like, well, yes, this guy is clearly very athletic, or he's very good at spying or sneaking or whatever, and or charming people or gambling or what have you. And so they're simply just able to do those things, and it's backed up by what the sheet says, which is kind of
justify
cool.
and role play.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it's a pretty simple thing to just double, right? 2. Double to 4 because it's harder, double to 8 because it's practically impossible, and everything gets capped at 10, right? So modifier cap 10, so so you're not going to be applying anything higher than an 8 as a penalty, and you're good to go.
And if you're doing that, you're probably looking at tables and stuff, because it's like, wow, this is going to be that hard. Better make sure that it's legit, right? Contemplated in the rules, So, but it controls the math to a degree, which is great. You don't want to be, you don't want to be rolling 30 dice for something. It's a good idea.
Right. One of the things that I have failed to do for this game, or and I've got to do, but I'd like to do for other Ubiquity games, is have a cheat sheet as a game master where I kind of know what people's ranks are, what skills they actually have, because very often, you don't necessarily need to say, oh, well, does anybody have an investigation skill or empathy? You know the guy that has a really high empathy, and you can kind of let him know. You can kind of take the average for them, if you will.
Assume the average.
Yeah, and because that's something in like, say, the older OSR game, it might be by archetype, or you sort of say, well, this fellow knows how to do this. Here, that's a helpful aid. I noticed there's a few parts of the system which I don't want to say give me trouble, but there's parts where I need a cheat sheet here for something like that. And that's definitely one of them. Makes it very, very helpful.
In 2D20 play, right, you have the opportunity to spend momentum to get more information.
Right.
And this is one of the things that you can do. You can, as the game master, assume the average for a player. Right, they've got a very high perception, and rather than saying, would you like to take the average or would you like to roll, you tell them what they spot with the average. And then if that's not satisfying for them, they can then bring up rolling or not, and go from there. And it works similarly.
Yeah, Lloyd's actually been doing that with us with perception. Like, all the time he's been taking the average for us, has been pretty cool,
Yeah. I don't recall having heard that rule spelled out before the taking the average. I think one sort of intuited something similar before, but it's always great to have these profound observations of how a system works, spelled out. Because once you read it, you go like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I've noticed myself started doing that in other games, right? I've run Blood and Bone, which is a variant of all things 3.5 D&D or Pathfinder. It's like an old school version of the 3.5 game in terms of the mechanics, but it plays pretty much like an old school game, and it has skills in it. And I find myself just going, well, this guy with that skill should probably be aware of this fact. And then I just narrate, because of your experience that this, or, and I find myself remembering, I've been doing this all my life, but sometimes you forget, sometimes you double, you second guess yourself. It's like, should I make him roll? Should I not make him roll? And just having the rules spelled out just sort of clarifies and crystallizes it in your mind, and just gives you permission to just do it. It's good. It makes sense. So
cool.
Yeah.
All right. Anything that anybody wants to add at this point?
Yeah, actually, there was one thing I thought to when I was talking about, like, little cheat sheets or something, like, what kind of aids do I have? I would say the one thing that still gives me, I don't want to say it gives me trouble, but is, like, non-player characters themselves, because the game system kind of has a method of creating them, whether they're an ally 1 or an ally 2 or all those sorts of things. There's a certain mathematical formula that goes to that, and so it can be not daunting is not the right word, but it can take, I got to take a couple minutes to make this guy, and if you're like me and meticulous, the ballpark isn't good enough to say, it's got to add up. But one of the things that because we were playing Star Wars, Robert the narrator was nice enough to send me the set of adversary cards for that game, and they're all just spelled out. Like, I was like, these are great, and it instantly made me think of the fact that, like, Wiki has put like gazillions of non-player characters and examples of typical cultists, typical this, like, in his books. And I think, well, I gotta transfer those, make myself some 3x5 cards of those, because those are great, because you've done, like, just tons of the work for you. And so if AAAs were ever to produce a set of Ubiquity cards, I would buy 10. Just saying, if you're listening to, what I mean? Because that was a really neat thing that Fantasy Play had. But yeah, but there's literally so many of those. So, like, every once in a while when I say, oh geez, I've got to go make some, I realize, oh wait a minute, I can just go leaf through these, especially the AAA books, and there's just like tons of them in there.
I gotta say, I one of my personal I guess it's a pet peeve or something, is or personal axiom is I judge games by the strength of their monster manual, right? It's whatever the adversaries are. If they're spelled out, I don't like making monsters, like spending time statting out monsters and doing math for the monsters. I don't like that. I like somebody to do the work for me, and then I can choose, right? Or modify or add. But if the baseline of monsters is good, then it's easy to run, right? There's variability, and by monsters I mean monsters, and NPCs, and all sorts of other characters for which you might need stats, right? So if that work has been done for you beforehand, it just speeds up play and adventure design and all of that. So.
No, absolutely. That's true. You know, every once in a while, I wish there were like more creatures or whatever. You know, because it's not always appropriate to send a brontosaurus after somebody. You know.
Yeah. But,
That's heck. But you know, a horrifying array of creatures and desolation.
Right.
And
exactly. And that's part of the beauty. You can sort of steal the creature for somewhere else, and maybe add a point here or take a point away there, and you can sort of, if you have a bunch of the games, you can. I would feel perfectly comfortable stealing one of Wiggy's vampires and just putting it in Quantum Black. It's like, it's got to be fine. It's a 1 or 2 point difference,
That's not his vampires. We're all going to die.
Well, I sort of noticed that.
The All for One vampires and the Gothic horror vampires are not the same.
No,
true. So maybe I should go for the Gothic horror. I think those are a little bit easier.
The All for One vampires are hideous, but he's pretty good. Yeah, good at that. Where was I going with that? There was something really intelligent I was going to say, but it's gone now.
It'll come back.
It probably.
Fertile ground to grow. So. All right. Well, I think we've run through our list of topics, and so let's agree to agree.
Yes.
That we're having a good time.
Yeah.
No, definitely having a very good time with it. Definitely. Oh yeah, that was the thing. It wasn't that intelligent, man. I made the shark for Leagues of Cthulhu, the one that ate the unfortunate pirate. But it was fair game if one of you guys got knocked back, because I'm using the knockback rules. Those are great. Knock down, knock back, and if everybody got knocked back. And I looked through the books really fast, and I didn't see. I forget which game it is. It might be Hex that has a shark. It might be Leagues of. And I looked afterwards, and my shark was so much worse. this thing had a flurry talent and could attack twice. It could attack 2 times without a penalty, and some ridiculous 13 lethal die. Anybody who won the water was dead.
Yeah,
like geez, I'm so you don't want me designing those.
Little baby shark. Yeah, compared to
it was horrific.
Nice.
That's all. It wasn't that intelligent. It was just funny.
My last question, which was the rate of experience. Are you giving out experience with each session? I know you're playing kind of shorter sessions. Are you doing it every 2? Have you decided not to do experience at all?
It completely slipped my mind, really, giving out experience.
Oh yeah.
But my usual benchmark is every 4 hours, because look, whenever somebody says, "Oh, we played a session," everybody's talking about 4-hour sessions, and I never play 4 hours at a stretch. So I'm used to waiting a couple of sessions between going, and so we've actually.
You have mission-based play, right?
That's true. Mine is more mission-based than anything. So, but
you can do it at the end of the mission. Yeah.
That's another thing that's been going through my mind. Maybe I should wait until this mission is completed, and we've only played 5 hours by my count. So it's maybe a little more than a session. It's been 3 days, but 2 hours the first day, 2 hours the second day, 1 hour the third night. So only 5 hours.
Yeah, it feels appropriate to me, like to do it at the end of the mission, so to speak, especially considering the questions you're answering, to get experience in terms of role play. Were you successful, or did you feel like you were in any danger? Which will be a big yes. What did your character learn? And I've been using the same kind of algorithm for giving out experience in Leagues of Cthulhu. It's just they really haven't kind of completed a thing yet, and so once I feel like that's happened, without making it drag off too long, then I think it'd be experience time. Once they've once it feels like there's just a pause in the action or whatever, because they are, once again, they are on the mission. So,
But I'll tell you, I don't know if it's me or is it the character design or what is it, but they feel good from the start.
oh yeah,
These days when you play, if you play old school, I've learned to recognize that those characters feel done right from the start. Like if you're playing a fighter from first level, that's a full fighter. There's nothing, It's only when you play like the spellcasters where you feel, well, I can only have one spell. I need to get this guy to level like 7 before it feels like a real wizard. If you play Ubiquity, I feel like from the start I have everything I need. Anything on top of this is like icing on the cake. The character feels complete from level 1, which is the complete opposite from games like Pathfinder or something where that the level 1 character is just the bare bones, most primitive version. It's just an embryo. We needed to get it to level 10 before it starts feeling like the concept that I originally wanted to play. That's not present here or in old school. Really, this is a good character. I can do everything that I want to do from the start. I can get better at it, but I already have my baseline. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know, man. I tell you, me playing old school games, I'm like, come on, level 5, come on, hurry up, because I feel like I'm about to die at any moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ubiquity, you do feel the characters do feel very good from the start, and sometimes you're like, oh yeah, I got experience. Like, what am I going to do? Because the character already feels complete.
Yeah.
That is one of the neat things that Quantum Black did, though, is having those. You start a character with more XP, by the book. And occasionally, especially if you're doing like one shots or something like that with Ubiquity, sometimes I think it's worth considering like starting with more XP just to make them feel a little bit more.
Sure. Well, you can find that in Hex and
right.
the other game, but without the allies chart. They put
right.
it on the allies
exactly.
rating, but so that if you want to play Indiana Jones instead
right.
of
that's true. And
short round?
Sure.
I'm just reminded that, the Quantum Black does contemplate starting you off with 1 talent and 1 resource.
Right. Yeah.
And I love that to death because, the temptation is always there. 15 extra points, I'll go for something else. But when the points are already pre-assigned, right? No, these 15 points are exclusively for resources, and that's great because then I get to pick from this list, which if I had the option I probably would never pick from, and I think that adds something to character creation. Plus, those resources are not necessarily combat things, right? It's a lot of RP stuff, a lot of role play, and I think it just fleshes out the character a lot. I really like the fact that you start with those 1 talent and 1 resource, and then you get 15 extra points to do what you want. I like that personally. Yeah.
All right then.
Okay.
Thanks for chatting.
Yeah.
Right on.